We're now going to be joined by Congressman Joe Kennedy III. Of course, Congressman represents a good chunk of this listening audience. He's Fall River and Lakeville and all the way over to the Rhode Island border and then up to Newton and Brookline in that area. And so this is the first time that Congressman Kennedy has ever joined me here on WBSM. And so we're really glad to have him. Good morning, Congressman. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
So tell us, Congressman, how is life for you during the COVID-19 virus?
Probably not all that different from many others. I got two little kids, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, who, as far as I can tell, wake up too early every morning and try to find new ways to put holes in the wall and burn the house down. And so that's kind of where we start. My wife runs a nonprofit, so it's been a hectic past couple of months for her. We've been very much sheltering in place like everybody else, aside from a couple of trips that I've had to make down to Washington to go vote, and a couple of times that we've gone out to deliver meals or drop off some masks and some other ways that we've tried to just help folks in our local communities here. But other than that, it's been, at least early on in this crisis, was kind of a sprint to chase down PPE for our healthcare facilities and our frontline workers, then working on legislation to try to make sure we can get through this, strengthen our healthcare sector, strengthen our economy, try to make sure, again, our kids don't destroy the house, and then try to run a Senate campaign all at once. So it's been a bit of a juggling act. We're speaking with Congressman Kennedy. Congressman, in fact, you've been going down to Washington. You folks had to vote on some bills, some very important bills, and I know there's been a latest bill that's been voted on that has to do with direct aid to cities and towns, particularly places hard hit like Fall River and New Bedford and other parts here in Massachusetts. And I know that it's looking for direct payment, in some cases anyway, right to cities and towns. Talk a little bit about what you folks in Washington are trying to do for the cities and towns here in Massachusetts. So we need to do a lot, and what's going on at the moment is not nearly enough. But what we passed, the House of Representatives passed last Friday, was a big start, and it was nearly $1 trillion, so a massive amount of money. About roughly 500 billion or so for states, and about another nearly 400 billion plus for cities and towns. The big thing here, Chris, recognize that. So the projections here for Massachusetts is on a fiscal year that ends on June 30th. They are expecting about a $6 billion shortfall in our budget. That happened essentially in 3 months, from mid-March to June, and that's about 15% roughly of the Massachusetts budget. That is a devastating hole. We have less than $4 billion in a rainy day fund, and we're looking at a $6 billion hole. Early projections for next year, the next fiscal year, are about 25%. And remember that about 40% of our state budget is healthcare, and about 20% is education. So no one wants to cut healthcare, and you certainly don't want to cut it in the middle of a pandemic because people need it. And no one wants to cut education because our kids need it, and our future needs it. So if you're not going to cut either of those two things, you turn around and say, okay, well, how do you cut 25% when all of the rest of it, everything else, from local law enforcement to at-risk youth to Department of Children and Families to parks and environmental protection, all of it makes up that other 40%. You got to cut over half of that out, down to zero. And so that's where it is so critical that the federal government step in and provide this funding. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has said at this point that he doesn't see the urgency to do so, which is a really frustrating statement to hear. And again, let's be clear, this is not just Massachusetts that is facing these enormous budget shortfalls. It's literally every state in our country and every city and town in our country, some worse than others. But the hit to services, the hit to quality of life, the hit to just basic function is going to hit every family in this country, Democrat, Republican, North and South, and anything else. And so I hope the majority leader changes his mind pretty quickly.
We're speaking to Congressman Joe Kennedy from Massachusetts. Congressman, I was speaking, in fact, last night with Hank Turgeon, who's the head of the New Bedford Police Union. Their members are very concerned not only about their day-to-day life in this COVID-19, but whether they're going to get laid off.
Absolutely. And look, again, that's when people hear, state aid and wonder what that is, that's exactly what that is. Municipal budgets, there's money that comes from the state down to cities and towns. Those cities and towns, that's everything from firefighters, first responders, police officers. Those are teachers. It's literally the basic way in which we expect our state to function relies on that money. And if you don't have it, And again, this isn't saying, hey, you're going to have to go through a little bit of a budget cut. This is taking 25% out, where you just don't have anything really to give. There's not a whole lot of fat in those budgets to begin with. So it's a really it's a dire circumstance. The federal government's actions so far have propped up and have avoided the worst catastrophes yet. And I say that knowing that 33 million people have lost their jobs. So this is already devastating, and 90,000 people have died. The federal government's efforts here have helped prop up an economy to make sure we haven't seen an absolute economic devastation at a systemic level, although for many families it has been so. And what we're calling on here is to make sure that we provide the assistance necessary in order to make sure we can get through this.
We're speaking with Congressman Joe Kennedy. So, Congressman, one of the big industries here, obviously, is fishing. I think it's about 1 or 2% of the GDP of Massachusetts. Last I checked. I was speaking with a former mayor, Scott Lang of New Bedford, yesterday as well, and he's talking about some of the stuff you've done on fishing. Outline for some of the people some of your thoughts on the fishing industry.
So, look, this is a critically important industry for Massachusetts, and obviously economically, one. And particularly in New Bedford, where you got, by tonnage, one of the most wealthiest port in the country in terms of value of the catch. And historically, right, this is something that is literally, as Bay Staters, as New Englanders, this runs through our bones. And we got to make sure that this industry is going to be able to survive. It's critically important to our local communities. It's a critically important food source for people across the nation, and it's a critical driver to our economy. And so one big piece to this was about $300 million in the prior package that was passed in order to provide relief to the fishing industry, and there was about 30 million of that was coming directly here to Massachusetts. And this is an industry that is obviously critically important to our economy. And we need to ensure its vitality and its survival as we navigate our way through this at every step of it. And so it's been a big focus of our delegation. Congressman Keating's been doing a lot to lead the effort here, and we'll keep fighting.
We're speaking with Congressman Joe Kennedy. So, Congressman, Marcus Farrow, who's a regular contributor here on my program, wrote a fascinating article about what you're doing with what's called the Gideon Bill regarding attorneys for more than just criminal cases. Explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, so people are familiar with the fact that if you're charged with a crime, in almost every instance, you're provided an attorney. If you can't afford one, the state provides you with one. What folks don't know, and so many folks aren't aware of, is the way in which criminal cases are often linked to civil cases, and that in a lot of circumstances, the consequences of a civil case it can be even more dire than a criminal charge. And if you think about it for a second, I was a domestic violence prosecutor. You arraign somebody on charges of domestic violence, but if the victim asks for a restraining order, that's a civil proceeding, and that victim is not entitled to any sort of legal assistance as you navigate through it, despite the fact that perhaps the abuser is going to have an attorney and contest that proceeding. There's robust rights to make sure people can, if you're renting, if you're a tenant, robust rights protecting tenants in Massachusetts. However, if you're not aware of those, particularly in incidents like foreclosure or an economic recession like we are in, a lot of those rights go unrecognized and unrealized, and people will try to force you out of a home, even though you've got rights to actually stay there. So what we've done, and this has been an effort that's been literally building for 50 years, is to try to make sure that people in areas of basic need have access to an attorney in civil cases. So when it comes to issues like physical security, family, so child custody proceedings, and housing and sustenance, so things like food stamps, that in the areas of your basic need that you're going to be guaranteed an attorney. And the fact is that there is so much need out there that in the vast majority of these cases that are critical to families' well-being, they don't get one, and the consequences of it are dire.
We're speaking with Congressman Joe Kennedy. And so one of the very interesting things about Congressman, obviously he comes from a very famous, very successful family. One of the things, the hallmarks really of his great uncle's administration, John F. Kennedy, was the creation of the Peace Corps. I've had a number of friends who've gone through the Peace Corps, including a great friend of mine, Bill Short, who was in the first class in 1961, went to Columbia. And Congressman, you also followed in the footsteps of your family. They created the program. Your other uncle, Sergeant Shriver, ran the program originally. You joined the Peace Corps. You went to the Dominican Republic. Someone of your wealth and privilege and background often doesn't do that, quite frankly. And so I found that to be very interesting, the way you connected the lines, your lineage here and the history of your family, and did the real work. Explain what it was like, why you joined the Peace Corps, what the experience was like.
Look, there is no doubt in my mind that if I did not spend that time as a volunteer in the Dominican Republic, I would not be where I am today. And I think most volunteers will tell you that it's the experience that has the most profound professional impact on their lives. And there's not a day that goes by that I don't draw on that experience. And that might surprise some folks, but being a member of Congress, where at our best, what you're trying to do is find in a big, wide, diverse country and try to find areas of commonality, try to find the pieces that unite us as a nation, try to step outside your own experience and step outside the way that you look at things and try to see things from somebody else's perspective, understand where they're coming from, understand their own histories and their stories and their viewpoint, and try to find a way to craft a solution to a problem that affects us all. And that's what Peace Corps volunteers do. That's what I did as a volunteer in the Dominican Republic, working with these guys that were getting horribly taken advantage of by these big international tour companies that were leveraging this incredible, beautiful series of waterfalls in the Dominican Republic. But that's what members of Congress are supposed to do too, right? Find ways that unite people that are cross borders, whether that's their boundaries, whether that's Democrat or Republican, or north, south, east, and west, or young and old, whatever those differences are. You find ways to try to bring people together and build consensus. And so, as I said, there's not a day that goes by that I don't rely on that experience. I did not love every second of it. There's parts of that experience that, without question, are uncomfortable, are difficult. I was sick a bunch. I was isolated from my family for a while there, but it was an incredible experience for me, no doubt.
We're speaking with Congressman Joe Kennedy. So, Congressman, you've been in the House of Representatives for a couple of terms now, and you've decided to move up the chamber. You would like to be in the United States Senate. You would like us to send you to the United States Senate. Why the Senate, sir? Make your pitch.
Because I believe we need stronger leadership in the Senate and across all government. And if I believe that, Chris, 8 months ago when I got in this race, I certainly believe that even more so now. What we have here is not just a national epidemic with COVID-19, and yes, we need to get through it. But we also, I think it's become painfully clear that this virus and the impacts of it have gotten so much worse because, in part, of the choices that Washington has made over the course of the last 30 or 40 years. We are seeing this impact communities of color. You're seeing the disproportionate impact on lower income communities, on immigrant communities, exacerbated by people that have access to health care, that have or don't, that have access to that don't have to telecommute, that have access to a vehicle, that have jobs that provide them the ability to isolate, and those that don't. The way in which our society has taken advantage of essential workers for literally decades, and now expects them and requires them to put themselves on the front line so that the rest of our society can function. And if you believe that, if you've seen that, you know that there's going to be a big fight for change. And I think to deliver that change, I don't think you can rely on the same folks that have been in office for the last 50 years to all of a sudden flip a switch and reconfigure a society that they helped build that got us to this point.
We're speaking with Congressman Joe Kennedy. Congressman, before I let you go, we know that you lost one family member recently to the opioid crisis. Yeah. That's a major problem across the country, but of course the greater New Bedford area has seen its damage. The Cape has had its problems. Talk a little bit about your thoughts on the opioid crisis, what your plans are, what you'll do as a United States Senator to try to stop this.
Look, the opioid crisis was one of the reasons why I ran for office in the first place. I was a prosecutor down on the Cape and Islands, low-level prosecutor. It was my first job out of law school. And I saw it every single day in our court system. And it wasn't just folks that were buying and selling drugs. It was the consequence of addiction and the lengths to which somebody would go to satiate it. And, Chris, I remember very clearly one day, it was Friday late morning, we'd finished the arraignments for the day. I got called back up to the courtroom, and I'm walking in to arraign this guy as I read the charges, and this guy steps in front of me, and he asks for the prosecutor. I said, because his son had just gotten arrested. I said, well, you actually want a defense attorney, and they're down the hallway. And he said, no, I want to talk to you because I want you to hold my son without bail. And I was stunned, and he explained that his son had recently returned from fighting overseas, and he'd gotten addicted to OxyContin. That he'd stolen and sold almost every piece of jewelry that the family owned, and he wasn't certain what his son would do if he were released. And he called around and got in a bed for him at a treatment facility on Monday, and the only way he could make sure that he got there was to have his son arrested. I called one of my supervisors, and we walk in, and this guy who was roughly my age at that point stands up, and he gets read these charges, and he turns to the judge, who was a Vietnam vet, and he apologized. And he apologized to his family, and he said that he wanted help, he needed help, and that if he were released, he wasn't sure what he would do over the weekend. That is how we treat our veterans. That is how we treat people with addiction. That is how we are treating people that are asking for help, and that the largest provider of mental behavioral health services in this country are the jails in Chicago and in Los Angeles. And folks are screaming out for help, and we can do so much more. Mental behavioral health and addiction has been one of my major areas of focus in Washington, and it's going to be if I'm elected to the Senate. I promise you that. And yes, New Bedford's been devastated by it, but almost every family in this country has too. And folks deserve better, and they deserve more, and I'll keep fighting for you. Congressman,
I want to thank you again. I know we got to get you out of here. I do appreciate you spending some time with us this morning. Thanks so much. Is there a website people can go to if they want to learn more about what's going on?
Absolutely. Kennedy4FORMA.com. We'd love to have you get involved with the race. We'd love to have your support.
All right. Thanks a lot, Congressman. Have a wonderful day. Good luck. Stay safe, my friend.
Appreciate it, my friend. You too.
Bye-bye. That was Congressman Joe Kennedy III running for the United States Senate. He's currently our congressman.